What's up, everybody? We're back with our engine harvest off our Project Ute. Hopefully we get the engine out today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Make It and Break It. My name's Andrew. Behind me is our Project Ute Chrysler 300C. And on the last episode, we started pulling some of the peripherals out. Hello, Joseph. And pulled our intake manifold off to try and get clearance. And we found we had more issues even than we knew about on this car. Someone decided to use a bolt that's way too long and broke the intake manifold, which is really annoying. Today we're going to hopefully finish up all of the rest of the accessory removals. I'll walk you guys through everything that we have removed and everything you probably need to remove as we go do it, and then get this engine out, hopefully without taking off this front core support, although we may end up having to do that anyway. I want to start with a discussion on lift points for everyone, because there's a couple different ways to lift this engine, and some of them are, I would say, safer than others. But the factory built in a certain way to lift this engine, and it's actually up on top here. So let me show you that. Go hand cam. Wonder if this is, hey, it is movable. So I can actually see what's going on here. So we're at the top of the engine. This is where the intake manifold was. We removed that last time. There's all of your various fuel connectors and your spark plug connectors and your coil pack connectors and stuff like that. So as we go in here, the factory wants you to rig from these two holes here, which is right there, you can see that. And then this one has a little zip tie thing in it holding the wires for these sensors down underneath the intake manifold. And it also wants you to use this arm here off of your front water housings. This is your top water line that goes into your radiator right here. The factory wants you to use this as well, because this is a pretty solid hard piece mount. In fact, they sell essentially adapter plates that mount there and here, and then have a couple things to adjust the tilt of the engine if you want to. That's, if you can use those and they work for you, definitely do, because that's how the factory designed them to be used and designed this engine to come in and out. If you're gonna do more than one or two installs of an engine, or if you're working on Hemis regularly, definitely go ahead and buy that factory bracket. I can see where it would be very useful, or a modified version of it would be very handy to have. So that can work if you have the right rigging fixtures. I've got one here that I might try and use for that. That's one option. And wherever possible, you do want to use the factory rigging options when pulling an engine, because as you'll see in a minute, that's probably the stoutest location to put rigging pieces from that's still safe. The next available and easy one is one we talked about last time, and it's one when I was originally looking at doing, and it's actually using these bolted holes here, so on the head. So there's one in the front and back of each head. So these are actually relatively correctly sized for lifting an engine of this size. I believe all of these holes right here are the same thread. They're M8 by 1 1/4, I think, 1.25, something like that. I'll put the call out for the thread size and pitch. So all of these holes are actually the same size. Why you might not want to use these holes? One, because these heads are aluminum, which means that if you don't set up your bolting correctly, you can actually bend or strip the threads, or could possibly damage the heads. I wouldn't say you'd really damage these heads, but you could absolutely damage the threads in here. And the backside ones are what you use to ground out a lot of the rear engine harness on those backside ones we removed earlier. So damaging threads and stuff like that can be really bad, and it's very hard to, I wouldn't say it's hard, but repairing threads and aluminum components is not the most fun thing in the world. So these threaded items on aluminum is not ideal. They shouldn't really break the block or anything. These heads are on there and are, you know, solidly on there, as well as everything else. And for 1 or 2 installations, it's probably fine to use that. That's why we were originally going to use them. But then I figured out a way I might be able to use the factory rigging locations. So we're going to try that first. And then the third location is actually one I don't necessarily suggest, even though I've seen it on YouTube videos. So if you look it up on YouTube, look up like 5.7 liter Hemi removal, Darts charger, Hemi removal, something like that. There's a couple videos out there that are pretty good. They show you a lot of things you need to remove, but they almost always suggest rigging by using lifting straps to the engine mounts, which are kind of right down there below the headers. There's one reason they do this is that you don't have to lift off the heads, so they don't risk damaging heads. It also doesn't require you to have a specialty lifting fixture. You can just put some, essentially they are using seatbelt material to create a sling here and a sling here, and then they bring in the crane or the hoist and grab here and pull it. But those things are actually very centrally located on the engine, and unless you get very creative with your routing, it means the engine will move like this, which can be good, but it's also not particularly stable. When you're lifting something that's several hundred pounds over some stuff that you usually care if it breaks or doesn't break, stability, I highly value stability in that case. So you can use that. People have done that. I don't necessarily suggest that. I'd much rather bolt into the heads, all 4 heads at once with like our standard load leveler than do that sort of lift. So hopefully we don't have to do that. But those are kind of the lifting points. Now we're going to go through the remaining sorts of things that we need to worry about for removing this engine. So we're going to go pull these. I said I pulled them in the last video, but I never actually pulled them. You do want to pull your ignition coils here, and then you want to work on your front accessories. So you need to pull your drive belt, and you may or may not need to pull your tensioner. I'm not going to plan on pulling my tensioner. Then you need to pull a lot of the drive belt accessories. So you're going to want to pull your alternator out. This is the power steering pump up here, and then down below that right there is your AC pump. You do not need to disconnect these or take off the hoses or anything like that. You can literally just pull these off and set them off to the side. So power steering pump has some bolts onto the front, so once you pull the drive belt, you can just pull the bolts off and then essentially just flip it over to this side. There's 4 bolts on your AC compressor down here. There's 1 at the top, there's 2 on the bottom, and there's 1 at the back that is that you probably want to pull. And then your alternator here, there's a bolt on top, and I think 1 or 2 bolts on bottom. Got to pull those and get the alternator out of the way. Go ahead and disconnect it and pull it out completely. It's not like one of those you can leave hanging like these 2 pumps over here can just be left hanging. You do actually need to get this out of the way. in order for everything to come out nice and neat. Also give you access to the sensor underneath. This is the sensor, the oil pressure sending unit sensor that's underneath here. We actually replaced that sensor on this engine. We were trying to keep the car, and you really do need access to that to disconnect it, because that's the last sensor on this piece of harness that needs to come out so we can pull the engine out. On the back side over here, you see two heat coolant lines that run through the valley of the engine. Those need to be disconnected. I think those are your heater cores or something like that. So that side and that side. Both sides have a coolant line you need to disconnect. And then that's pretty much it up here. There's you might as well disconnect these sensors as well. Partially because you have to get them out of the way of the rigging gear, and I think you also have to remove the harness anyway. So you might as well pull the connectors while they're up there. And we're gonna go do that real quick, and then I'll give you guys a walkthrough of what to go pull underneath. GoPro hand cam here. Hopefully it's not too blurry. Alternately, I just found out that my sensors on the top of the engine are stuck. So I've removed them, and then right down in here, they are essentially glued to the top of the engine block. You don't necessarily need to remove these sensors from the top of the engine block, or these connections from the top of the engine block. The wiring harness actually runs down here to another connection on the back of the head. So right there is a connection on the back of the head underneath that line from the AC, maybe? Coolant. Air conditioning coolant line or something like that. Underneath that on the back of the head, there is an electrical connection to disconnect that harness from the rest of the engine harness so that it can come out with the engine. So you could do it either way. Just remember, if you leave it installed, like I'm about to do, you need to move it out of the way any rigging gear you're going to be attaching. So definitely learn from my mistakes. Instead of jumping the gun to pull the intake, I should have removed all the stuff while the car was on the ground, but now that it's up, I don't really want to put it down and then bring it back up. So my back hurts a little bit. Anyway, we've got most of the stuff out. You saw me removing the power steering pump and all of the coil packs and these hoses. I ended up cutting these back hoses off. They were pretty much stuck on there. I don't know if this engine's ever been out or if those hoses ever been replaced, but if they haven't, those were 200,000+ mile hoses, basically stuck onto the metal part. So I had to cut them to get them out. They're luckily pretty short runs, so they should be easy to find replacements if you have to do that too. Couple items I pulled that I didn't talk about earlier. One of them you will have to pull, one of them you don't. The one you will is this black plate. So this is actually sitting back here, and it's got it's mounted by these two holes to the back side of the transmission on a stud or a bolt. I can't remember which one it looks like a stud from here. On a stud that you'll have to take the nuts off to get the transmission separated from the engine. And so you have to move this to get to those nuts to pull the studs off. It also has some of the engine harness attached to it on these different parts. So you'll want your removal tool or a hammer or very small hands, something to get those harness attachments off. The next thing I removed, and you probably won't have to unless your car is as janky as mine, is this. So this is actually the what's left of the bolt and socket combination. We'll get this up close here for you. Oh yeah, look at this. So this is what was holding the idler pulley on, and the problem with this one is this now extends 2 or 3 inches farther forward than it would normally. And that means it certainly won't clear the fan shrouds, which we've got to go remove, and we're going to do that before we go down beneath to do the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about here in a second. But it may not even clear the radiator, and while you don't necessarily need to pull the radiator to do this job, if it's your first time, you're worried about clearance, or you're worried about your radiator getting broken, I would definitely suggest pulling it. It's pretty easy to go pull it. There's only a couple extra bolts to go get to it. But we're not going to pull the radiator, so I definitely need to pull this idler pulley bolt out. Someone definitely welded this with a flux core, by the way. Not even a MIG welder. The fan shroud and the fans. There is an electrical connector right here, kind of underneath where your upper radiator hose runs, and then there's a couple bolts right next to that hold the fan shroud on. And then you should be able to just pull that up and out and get yourself a little bit more space to work in front here. Now we're going to go underneath here, and we're going to switch you to the GoPro, and I'm going to talk about what you need to remove from underneath. Okay, so we're down here, and hopefully this turns out well. I can't see what we're seeing on the GoPro here, but we're down here. We're going to start front to back. First is right up here. So that is your lower radiator hose. You're going to want to remove that and then remove it from the front of the engine block, which is kind of right in the middle over here. Next, we're going to come back here, and so if you can see this, these are the 2 bottom bolts for your alternator. So you want to remove this one and this one. They're tough to get to. It's actually probably easier to come at them from the front side over here where my finger is pointing. Hopefully y'all can see that. And then pull that out. There's a sensor connector back here, right on top of your oil filter. Go ahead and pull that. I'm pretty sure that has to come out, but basically every sensor needs to come off and just become disconnected. On the driver's side, this is your AC compressor. So the bolts are easier to get to from the bottom than the top. So you want to pull this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and this bolt. And then just let it hang wherever it wants to go. If you don't want to pull the AC compressor, you're going to have to deal with all the gas and have it pulled by someone who actually has the certification and the tools to do it, because it's actually very illegal and can be very expensive if you get caught dumping Freon all over the environment. So we'll move back here, and here is 2 of the last bolts you're going to pull, or these are nuts and stud combos. So these are the bottoms of your engine mounts. That's here and here. You can see there's some liquid on them. I have already put some penetrating fluid on it, and that's the first thing I did this morning before I started filming. So hopefully these things are loose, because these can get really rusty and tight. So you want to put some like WD-40 or PB Blaster or something on this and let it sit for a while. So there's one here, and then there's a similar side on the passenger side where it splits the power steering here, or your steering rack. Okay. So we're back here underneath the transmission. So hopefully we can show the last sets of bolts that we need to go pull in the sensors. So if you can see right up in here, there's a metal shroud right here. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is another sensor you're going to have to pull. I think it's a knock sensor. I'm not sure which sensor. It makes sense that this would be a knock sensor, but you're going to want to pull this connection, and then there's a similar one on the other side, but that one is behind this thing. So this is our starter. So you want to pull the starter. That's these 3 bolts. If you want to see the full sequence of what happens, go look at a previous video. I'll kind of link it, where we pulled the starter to get to a crank position sensor. So you want to pull this starter, and then behind it is a crank position sensor as well as a knock sensor. So you can kind of see those as we look up here. You can see that knock sensor right up in here again, and the crank position sensor is kind of behind it over here. And then some of the final bolts here. Each exhaust header needs to be disconnected from the catalytic converter, which is this thing. So they're bolts, there's 2 bolts on each side. These ones also tend to rust, so you want to get down here with WD-40 or PB Blaster and let them sit for a long time. Otherwise you can break them, and that gets really nasty. Also, while you're down here, you're going to want to pull the O2 sensors off of the headers just to give yourself more space. That's these things right here. So if you pull these, you'll get yourself a lot more space when trying to lift the engine out, because these things can catch on a lot of different stuff on the way out. And then finally, all the way back here, we have a bunch of bolts on both sides of the engine case. So I'm going to come over here to the side. So this is looking from the driver's side. You see bolts here, bolts here. Looking up a little bit, there's another bolt right there. And then above that, there's a couple studs, and it's mirrored pretty much on the other side. You want to pull those, as we want to pull all of those, and that is what allows you to separate the transmission from the engine rear housing. But before you pull those, there's one final bolt set I nearly forgot, and it's behind this little plate here. So behind this plate is your flywheel. Spider is trying to kill me. Behind this plate is your flywheel and your flex plate and your torque converter. So just like any automatic, the torque converter is bolted to the flex plate, which is bolted to the back of the engine. That's what keeps those 2 pieces together outside of this, which just kind of holds the cases together. But the actual parts that spin are held together by bolts, which are located in here. So you pull this plate and pull the bolts. The bolts are, I believe there's 4 of them. They'll be 90 degrees out. So you go find one, pull it, and then you just turn the crank and by hand with a big breaker bar or something like that, and pull the next one and work your way around to go pull all of the flex plate bolts. And at that point, you should be able to pull this and your engine mount bolts here again. So you'll pull these, and you should be able to lift the car out of here, hopefully. Alright, so this may not look much different, but a lot of stuff has been removed now. So we went through and removed all of our different compressors and pumps and everything. We've got most of our transmission bolts out. Right now we're at 6, and I believe there is 4 more nuts I need to take off for studs that are on the top hand side. I did have a couple tips and tricks for you people, especially if you're working on your back, like I am on this car with it just up on the quick jacks. So, first tip is when you're working on the rear bolt of your, hold on, first tip, when you're working on the rear bolt of your, what is this thing? Hold on, I'll come up with it. Alternator, that's it. When you're working on the rear bolt of your alternator, which is this one right here, if you have it like on the engine like this, it'll be on my left hand side right here. It definitely pays to already have your fans out from your radiator, because that lets you take a 1/2 inch. This is a Craftsman 1/2 inch drive ratcheting wrench, or a 3/8 inch, and you can get it pretty much straight along the front of the car, so it's along like this, so right along the front of the car. You can actually use a press, like a dumbbell press, and you can get a lot more leverage. Otherwise, it's really hard to get to that back bolt, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure that one out. Second thing, the transmission housing has a bunch of different bolts, and they face many different ways, which I find very annoying, and they're all different sizes, which I also find very annoying. But there's one bolt, these larger bolts, they have a 16mm head as opposed to the 15mm heads and probably the 14mm studs up here. That it's pointing back towards the transmission, and you have to pull it out. It's on the driver's side. You'll see it after, you'll see it as you're looking up past the oil pan. It'll be on the very lowest edge of the engine casing, not touching the oil pan. The easiest way to get to this bolt when you're going this way is actually from about where your AC compressor is. So I used about 2 feet worth of extensions, a universal, and an extended 6-point impact socket to snake it to get to that bolt from where the AC compressor kind of lays down around in front of the steering gear. And then I had to break it with a my 24-inch breaker bar. That was after I did some PB Blaster and everything to try and loosen it up. So that one's a pain, but the best way to get to it, if you can't lift it all the way up on a lift to get a nice gun angle on it, is to come at it from about the in front of the front cross member, about where the AC compressor sits once you disconnect it. The boss babe is home, and I want to go spend some time with her, so we're gonna take a bit of a pause and hopefully come back tonight and finish up the rest of our stuff. Just about 4 fasteners holding the transmission on, and then the couple fasteners, the 4 fasteners that are on the engine mounts, and this thing will be ready to come out. So we'll see you guys then. So that plan didn't work out. I made the fatal mistake of taking a shower and getting comfortable, and now it's too late to finish tonight and still get a video out for you guys. So we're gonna call it there. Next video we will finish pulling this thing. Even if we have to pull the front core support, we'll have a lot more time to go do that. So stay tuned, you'll see that come out very soon. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. My name's Andrew, and despite me not wearing the shirt, this is the Make It and Break It YouTube channel. If you like this video, hit like. Comment down below if you want some more clarification, comments, concerns. I know I had a guy contact me on Facebook about the last video we did on this subject, and I was able to help him through a couple things. So if you got questions about any of the process or anything, definitely hit me up either in the comments down below or on Facebook. I check all of them regularly. And if you like what we're doing in this channel, go ahead and subscribe. There's a icon, I think, down in here. Hopefully I'm pointing in the right direction. And you'll see more stuff with motorsports, stuff on these motorcycles, cars. We got a race car build coming up too. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. My name's Andrew, and we'll catch you all later.